I was honored to be on the In and Around podcasting show with Mark and Danny from Captivate, and we were talking about why podcasters, it's been reported for years that many people quit before episode 7, and that stat is now many people are quitting before episode 5. And I wanted to do a deep dive into that today, as well as throw in some things that are really annoying when you're a podcaster, so we can go in with the right expectations and the right mindset. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005, I'm your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson, thanking you so much for tuning in. If you are new to the show, this is where I help you plan, I help you launch, I help you grow, and if you want to, monetize your podcast. My website is schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code LISTENER when you sign up and save on either a monthly or yearly subscription, and of course, that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So why do podcasters who start a podcast turn around and quit maybe a month or two down the road? Let's look at that. So in 1988 is when he started his comedy career in Boston. In 1994, that's 6 years, he moved to LA to do television, which was news radio. In 97, that's 9 years after starting, he started working with the UFC. In 2000, he released his first stand-up special. That's 12 years after he started. In 2001, he started hosting Fear Factor. In 2003, he had a couple things. He took over hosting The Man Show on Comedy Central and also got involved with Last Comic Standing. In 2006, he went back to comedy, and in 2009, he launched his podcast. That's 21 years after starting his entertainment career. Fast forward to 2024, that's 36 years later, he gets his $200 million, and everybody's acting like it's 36 months. In fact, 36 months is really too long. Many people think it should take about 36 days, and I don't believe that is a realistic expectation. Here is another example. There's a guy named Marquise Brownlee. You probably know him as MKBHD on YouTube. He's 30. He's got 18 million subscribers, over 4.2 billion views, but we didn't know him when he was 10 years old, and he was just giddy over having 79 subscribers. Couple other people here. Mr. Beast, I'll be talking about him a little later. Right now, the biggest YouTuber. When he had 100 videos out, he had 760 subscribers. And PewDiePie, who, as far as I know, was the biggest YouTuber until Mr. Beast, when he had 100 videos, he had 2,500 subscribers. But the idea here is you don't start with a giant audience. It takes a while to build them. And so I started studying Mr. Beast, not because I want to be Mr. Beast. There's already one Mr. Beast, and it comes very natural to him, but I wanted to see how he got to where he was. And so he started when he was 11. He's 25 now, I believe, and he said by the time he was 18 and graduated high school, he was maybe making a couple $100. He said most of that time, especially the early, like 4 or 5 years, he didn't make a penny, and any money he made, he put it back into the show by buying equipment, microphones, laptops, things like that. And so once he graduated from high school, he went into hyper mode.
We were all super small YouTubers, and we basically talked every day for 1,000 days in a row and did nothing but just like hyper study, like what makes a good video, what makes a good thumbnail, what's good pacing, like how to go viral. And we just call it like daily masterminds. We would just get on Skype every morning. And like some days, like I'd get on Skype at 7 a.m. and I'd be in the call until like 10 p.m. And then I'd go to bed, I'd wake up and I'd do it again. And, we'd do things like take 1,000 thumbnails and see if like there's a correlation to the brightness of the thumbnail to how many views it got. Or like, like videos that get over 10 million views is like, how often do they cut the camera angles or like things like that?
And the other problem I see is there is a video where he has a guy and they're on a basketball court and he says, hey, if you make this 3-point shot, I'll show you what I make on YouTube. And it was interesting because this is his off channels. One was making $63,000 a month. The other one was making, I think, $95,000 a month. And then he goes, yeah, when we did this one island video, I was making $5 million an hour. I'm just going to let that sit there a second. $5 million an hour. So we see that and we're like, I want that. And I think some of our problem is we live in a microwave society. We expect things now, and we're not sitting there going, wait a minute, from 11 to 18, he barely made any money. Then he went all in, and fast forward 7 more years. If he was 18 and now he's 25, he's now making insane amounts of money. But in another video I saw, he said his work-life balance was 90% work, 10% life. And the reason that kind of works for him is he's doing what he loves. I worry about that mix, but just keep in mind, that's not realistic to want to do that in a year. We're on a different time frame.
Yeah.
So I recently started a new podcast, and half of the reason is for this right here. So I can look at you and say, look, I did almost no promotion of this. I mentioned a little bit in the School of Podcasting. I'd mentioned it here. I made an email list, and then I went in, and I currently am getting ready to launch my 3rd episode. And when I looked at it, what do you think I got? Because I know a lot of people are like, well, you're Dave Jackson. Yeah, but that doesn't matter. And so I went in and I just put it in all the places. So not just Apple, not just Spotify, but in Amazon, in iHeart, in any place that will have me, I have it. My trailer got 14 downloads. My first episode got 23 downloads. And my last episode, which has been out about 2 weeks, got 19 downloads, which is a full classroom. I'm an old teacher, so I look at things in multiples of 20. But here's the thing. Now I'm telling you, hey, this is out. And by the time you get to this, the next episode is going to be there. And that episode is a doozy. Not that the first 2 weren't, but this one's it's chock full of nuggets. It's an interview I did. You can find it at yourpodcastwebsite.com. And next week, I'll report back what actually telling people who like you, who many of you probably need this particular podcast because you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't even have a website, Dave. Well, now you can, and you'll see where the first episode is, do I need a website? The second one is, how much does it cost? And the third one is my interview with someone who actually designs websites. And so you're not going to have a gazillion people. Just being in Apple and Spotify and all the other places, for those of you that don't remember them, growing up, they made this giant book, and it had yellow pages in it and white pages. And the white pages were people, and they had your address and your phone number, and the yellow pages were for business. And it was huge. You could kill someone by dropping this on their foot. And everybody had an extra thick drawer right next to the phone. And I'm just here to say, being in the phone book, because there was a time when I was in the phone book, that's when I answered a phone that was on the wall. Being in the phone book did not make me popular. It didn't make me famous. It just made it easier to find me, kind of. Have fun with that when your last name is Jackson. And so being in Apple Podcast doesn't make you famous. It doesn't make you popular. It makes it easier to find you. So you have to then promote your show. And so I've said this before, I'll repeat it here, and that is, here is my kind of math equation for downloads. First of all, you have to have outstanding content that inspires your audience to want to tell a friend. So you have that. We call that value. Then you multiply it by smart promotion. So for instance, if I send out a bunch of postcards to people about my podcast, that may not be the best way to get to those people, because we don't even know if those people have a smartphone or anything to listen to a podcast on. I always say, if you want to catch a fish, You have to go someplace where there's some water. And so now, granted, if I'm trying to get to, I don't know, churches might go, oh, look, I got a little postcard. It says something I should point my phone at this. What does that mean? Right? Smart promotion. So value times smart promotion equals downloads. And that's not fun because that means you get the number of downloads you deserve. And one of the things, Jimmy is the name of Mr. Beast, by the way. Jimmy says, when I look back at my videos, I can see why my channel wasn't growing. My videos weren't very good. And he goes, and everybody has an inflated view of how good their stuff is. And I'm not exempt of that. There are times when I go, oh, this is good. I just listened to something. Let me play you something. And I go, I actually used this in a podcast? Why is this good? And I hear that now and I go, who appreciates 3.5 part harmony? Eugh. Right? Sometimes we go, maybe I could have polished that up a little bit. And there's nothing more fun in an audio podcast than doing math. So let's just take this a little bit. We're not going to do a ton of this, but just think about this. I had 20 downloads of my last episode. Next episode comes out. I'm hoping for 30. I'm hoping for 40, or I'm hoping for 1,000, right? Because I think this is really good. And I get 25. And you're like, oh man, it's only up by 5. Yeah, but that 5 against 20 is a 25% change. And there are times when on Black Friday or whatever insert American made shopping day, hey, it's the second Tuesday of the month. All the sheets are on sale. 25% off. You go, 25% off. Holy cow, let me grab my card. So we have to realize and keep things in perspective that, yeah, we're going to grow. And then maybe if the next episode is 25 and we get 27, let's say, and we're like, I was hoping for 30. Well, that is an 8% increase. As long as the numbers are not going down, and what you want to do is measure things consistently. So in many apps, it'll show you how many downloads you have after 7 days or after 30 or whatever it is. And the other thing I want to throw in here, because we're getting a little focused on downloads right now, downloads are so many other ways to measure your success. This is why you need to know your why. You need to know the why, because that's what's going to keep you from not burning out. If you don't get your why, you quit. You need to know your who, specifically, who is this for? What do they want? When you overlay those, you put the why over the who, you get your what. And in theory, you're then going to entertain them enough to keep them hanging around while moving them towards your what. But realize when you start off and you have small numbers, and what looks like a small increase, that's actually a decent size increase. When you have 10,000 downloads and you get 50, more, that's kind of small because the numbers are so huge. But don't underestimate these numbers. That's actually a decent percentage. I'll put a link in the show notes out at schoolofpodcasting.com/930 that has a page of here's what 50 people look like. Here's what 100 people look like. Here's what 1,000 people look like. And sometimes we get lost in those numbers. But again, I don't want to get too focused on downloads. That is the way we often judge, is this working or not? But you could be growing your network. You could be getting opportunities. On that show, your podcast website, episode 3, the designer, Greg from studio1design.com, ended up making websites for Sylvester Stallone. And that is because a podcast, as I mentioned this, your podcast builds relationships with your audience, and those audiences, we'll leave that in. Those relationships lead to opportunities, and the opportunities lead to more relationships. Those relationships lead to more opportunities, again, over time.
Yeah.
And there is an invisible benefit of podcasting. I told you, I believe in my last episode, my favorite teacher of all time passed away. And he was the guy that pulled me aside after I'd written something. And he's like, hey, this is really good. You should do more of this. Do you want to write for the newsletter? And I looked back and I was like, wow, that that led to this, which led to that, which led to this. And I thought about it that really we think the major benefit of the podcast, the major goal of the podcast is an MP3 file. And I get that. That's true. That's what we're looking for. But I really think one of the benefits is not the end result, but what you do through the journey. The benefit is you being better at organizing your thoughts, of spotting things that are entertaining, that you want to tell your audience. It's really, I think, one of the biggest benefits. It's not the podcast. It's the journey you go through to launch the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so this is one of the points that I brought up on the In and Around Podcasting show, and I'll bring it up here. And that is, back in the early days of podcasting, there were no free media hosts. And so you kind of had, for lack of a better phrase, some skin in the game. If you wanted a podcast, you had to put out some money. And I think now with things like Anchor or now Spotify for podcasters, you can start a podcast or not. And if you don't, you hit the button and go, hey, test. Oh, look at me. I'm a podcaster. And then they quit. I think that's another reason why this number may go down. In addition to things like, hey, what do you mean? I've been doing this a month and a half. Why can't I retire? Those kind of expectations, get that. But I think that's another factor in that. But there's another thing that I think can hinder people. And this is something that's new, because I've talked about expectations in the past, and this is something that I've seen a couple times, and I wanted to talk about it. And that is, maybe your topic is bringing a little heat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was growing up, you might walk into an establishment and it would say, no shirt, no shoes, no service. In other words, if you don't have a shirt on, yep, we're not serving you, or shoes. You needed to do those things to use the business. And now it seems like if I said that to you, you might go, well, that's it. I'm taking you to court. I represent those that are shirt challenged, right? And everybody, you're allowed to think anything you want as long as you think like me. Now, I'm going into very muddy waters here that this could just blow up right in my face. But here are the things that people aren't very tolerable about these days. And number one is religion. Number two is abortion, which is often tied to religion. Then we get into pronouns. Oh, yeah, I even just said the word, and I'm actually a little nervous right now, starting to sweat. I can feel it going down my neck. And then sexuality, which is also kind of tied to pronouns. And when I say this, I'm letting you know that you are free to talk about whatever you want with a podcast. You can use those naughty words if you want to. You can talk about whatever you want. There is, at least in the U.S., kind of freedom of speech, but that does not mean you are free of consequences. I mean, I've seen people almost get into fistfights over the who's better, David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar debate of Van Halen back in the 80s and 90s. So you can imagine when you start talking about a topic that in some cases defines who someone is. And I'm not saying this is wrong or this is right. I'm letting you know in the same way that if you walked on a pond and the ice was thin, I would say, hey, just so you know, you're walking on thin ice, so that if you fell in, you wouldn't go, oh, what happened? You might go, well, that was kind of my fault. I was walking on thin ice. And it seems the bigger the company, the less sense some of the rules make. I have been kicked out of Amazon Associates. That's their affiliate program twice. And the first time they said, you did this thing where you put an iframe. And I'm like, oh, I see it. I'm so sorry. I did that by accident. I fixed it. And the guy on the phone was like, yep, I see you fixed it. And I said, okay, so I'm back in. And he's like, no, you have to let Gary or somebody, give you the official thumbs up. And Gary said no. And I'm like, but I fixed the thing. I've been kicked out of my very own Facebook group for spamming. And I was like, hey, Lunch with Dave starts at 12:30. they're like, yeah, you're spamming. I'm like, it's my group. And, you can't really argue. I eventually went to you, the audience, and said, hey, does anybody know somebody at Facebook? And if I didn't have this microphone in front of me right now, I'd probably still be going, I've gone through all the channels trying to get back into my own Facebook group, which is why I have a Facebook group. I also have another community. I kind of wish we could ditch the Facebook thing, because at any time they can go, hey, you said booger, and I'm out of my own group. And now when we get to YouTube, this is another thing I see. This is a guy named, and now I don't know this guy, so if you're like, I can't believe you played this, I have no idea who this dude is, but I do know that apparently, well, this happened.
And then as soon as this, I get a message from Dane, our social media guy, and he's like, hey, take a look at this. And it says your videos have been removed. So the two biggest Timcast IRL shows on YouTube were deleted, both today. 3 years after they aired, with retroactive policy enforcement that they claim were always in effect, but only now they decided to remove.
Now, I don't like to hear that. And especially when it comes to content, it's very subjective. Like, for example, if you're walking along, you might step in manure, right? You might step in some poop, and we're fine. But sometimes that stuff goes up over the top of your shoe, and you're like, man, I stepped in right? There's a difference. And that's why I love words. I love words. I'm not anti-naughty word. I save them. Because sometimes you step in some, okay. I know a couple years back, Apple was pulling shows because people were spamming the author field. That made sense. I've seen a lot of people, get removed from Spotify because they're playing music they don't have the rights to play in their podcast. That makes sense. And then there are other times when your content may get pulled because you're talking about those topics that I just mentioned. Again, religion, abortion, pronouns, sexuality, and everything else that kind of sets people off. And those, again, are those things that some people have very, very, very strong opinions. And if they don't agree with you, like it or not, no shirt, no shoes, no service. Case in point, Overcast is an app that I still think is one of the best out there. I really wish it had the podcasting 2.0 stuff, but Marco, hey, it's his shop. And he said, I'm not doing it. So I either use it and miss it, or I walked. So I walked. I used Cast-O-Matic. But there's a way that you can run ads in his app for your show. And in it, there is a terms of sale. And one says extremely or highly divisive political topics. Now, the fun thing is, how do you define highly and extreme? Because one person's extreme is the other person's meh, not so bad. And so I had a member of the School of Podcasting that had a very, very extreme, in this case, it was right. It was the right side of the aisle. That's so far right, it was almost left. And he went to run an ad, and Marco said, no shirt, no shoes, no service, sorry. And he got very, very upset. And I understand that. You want to grow your show. But I pointed out, I'm like, well, there are other apps that you can advertise in. And this is my point. Look, I understand it's frustrating. I understand that that person doesn't like the way you think. But you can spit and stomp and scream. And when I was growing up, I would look at my dad square in the face and I go, it's not fair. And he'd go, life's not fair. And then what? The world does not revolve around David Jackson. And that was the case. And so maybe I'm passing along a little John Jackson advice here, but that's kind of the truth. And if you try to change someone, because again, it's their thing. They can run it the way they want. You want freedom of speech. They want freedom to run their company the way you run it, or they run it. And it's much better to go, okay, thanks for at least looking at my ad, and move on. Now, that is easier said than done, but I want to point out, and part of this is both the U.S. and the UK are having political elections in 2024. And and I'm not here to say don't start a political show. I'm just here so you can know that when you start saying my party, whichever one that is, because in the same way that YouTube guy has an enemy, and he's like, we're going to rally the troops. Because the other thing you'll notice, and I noticed a pattern as I was watching this, when you've been deplatformed or threatened with deplatform, and again, that's very scary. I don't like that. I've seen Patreon kick off people for things they didn't even do on their show. So, it's not fair. The world's not fair. So I say this because when you hear people like this, they often will then use this as a rallying cry to let's go stick it to the man. This isn't fair. And if this happens, this is what I thought was somewhat interesting, but it's true. He's not trying to scam us, but he was like, look, if we lose YouTube, we're going to lose all our money. And so that then rallies the troop that you need to become a contributor so that in the event, if we move from the biggest platform that we're getting the most traffic from, doesn't sound like a great business move. And I understand why he would want to, because they could flag him. But nonetheless, if you think of Rush Limbaugh in the United States was this very, very popular guy. And I would have listened to Rush if he had said one negative thing about Republicans, but he never did. He was a one-trick pony. The thing I like about Bill Maher right now, I hate his podcast, the Club Random, because he talks over his guests endlessly. But I like his show, or at least his stuff on YouTube, because he's taking shots at both sides of politics. And so I'm like, oh, that's refreshing. Somebody that's willing to maybe look at both sides. So I say this so that if you're doing a show that's talking about religion, abortion, pronouns, sexuality, and there are probably more topics there, that you're going to run into some stuff. There are going to be people that are like, you don't think like I think. And while you're allowed to think whatever you want to think, you're out of here. You're only allowed to think what you think when you think like I think, is kind of what I hear a lot. But I'm going to get off this horse right now. I'm not telling you not to do it, because newspapers and the media, see, now we're getting into weird, crazy tinfoil hat stuff, and you didn't tune in for this. But here's a question. How come there are negative side effects to Ozempic and nobody's talking about them? Because Ozempic buys sponsorship on mainstream media with really happy people who seem to be just loving the fact that they have type 2 diabetes. If just saying that kind of thing, let's say that. I just said that as an example, could have people going, well, I didn't tune in for this crap, and they're gone because you don't think like I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, enough of the almost political talk. Here's another thing that I want to talk about that I've never talked about, and that is if you're a brand new podcaster and you're really worried about this kind of stuff, remember, number one, that when you first start, we just mentioned, you're going to have tens of people listening to your stuff. So don't worry about the audience. But sometimes you really have that imposter thing and you just can't get around it. And so I found out something and I started looking into this and I was like, well, I kind of have that. But here's the first one. You might know her by the name Beyonce. However, before she takes the stage, in her mind, she considers herself Sasha Fierce. That's her stage persona. And she says, I walk different, I feel different. And can we take a tangent for just a second here? Okay, just a second.
Oh, lovely. Here comes another 10-second tangent from Dave. Brilliant. Such absolute rubbish.
There was a video where Beyonce was being interviewed, and she said, I just felt like something came into me. And because she said that, and I say this as a person who thinks Jesus is pretty cool, but a lot of the Christians are like, she's demon possessed. And I'm like, no, it's called a persona. So can we just kind of back off finding Satan in, I don't know, your Cheerios this morning? It just seems sometimes we're just, okay, with that said, let's get back. Here's another persona. Black Mamba is what Kobe Bryant, one of the best basketball players ever, when he put that on, that was kind of like, all right, it's my game face. That's what a lot of people talk. Do you have your game face on? You know, you might know Lady Gaga. She has a male alter ego called Joe Calderone, and she's described him as a mechanic and a man's man. He appeared in magazines, and in the music video for Lady Gaga's song, You and I, is Gaga's boyfriend. And so that was something she did to get into that part. Actors do. I mean, actors are walking, talking personas. Nicki Minaj has one called Roman Zelensky. Again, it's another male alter ego. You might know Eminem, who really, Eminem is his stage name. He's really Marshall Mathers, but his alter ego, his persona is Slim Shady. David Bowie, if we go back to the 70s, had Ziggy. Ziggy played guitar, ground control to Major Tom, right? He had a persona that paid off very, very well. We could go on and on. There are a bunch of celebrities that have done that. I'll give you an example. I was given a nickname in when I was 16 in a grocery store, and we had a bazillion Daves, and I was bored on my lunch hour, so I'd bring in my guitar because I love to play the guitar. And on my lunch hour, I'd sit back in the produce section. This is not on the floor. This is in the back, and play my guitar. And so one girl named me Jammin' Dave. Oh, there's Jammin' Dave. And so I was telling that story once when I was in a band, and they're like, oh, dude, we got to use that. You're now Jammin' Dave Jackson. And so when I felt that imposter syndrome creeping in, I'm like, who am I to do a podcast about the music business? I introduced myself as, you guessed it, Jammin' Dave Jackson. Not something I've done in a very long time. But even when I talk in public, if I have a big group in front of me, I have like a little thing that I put my game face on. And if I'm nervous, well, this happens no matter what size of people I'm talking to. My hands turn wider than they normally do, and they start to sweat about 5 minutes before I go. It's just something. And the minute I start, but there are times when I will just quietly to myself turn my back to anyone watching and go, it's showtime. And that is, it's a way that I kind of click on to, all right, here comes Jammin' Dave or whatever persona you want to put in. And it's me pretending to be outgoing. It's a weird thing. And I know it makes you sound like, wait, so do you have multiple personalities? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying when I've told you the story before, but I was so shy when I was growing up, and I lost a job because I wouldn't talk to customers. And so the guy that got me the job said, look, man, act the way you want to be, and someday you will be the way you act. Again, going through that, it's the journey. And so I just pretended I was outgoing, and now in some sort, I'm going to an event tomorrow. It is the Content Entrepreneur Expo. And I'm not going with a Libsyn team. It's just me. And there's a part of me that's like, I get to go meet a bunch of strangers. Yeah, okay, sure. But that's not me. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, and that guy is outgoing, and he's happy to meet people, and that whole 9 yards. So it is kind of fake it till you make it. And we have a running gag at the School of Podcasting. Nobody's going to punch you in the face. So press record, because Mr. Beast started when he was 11. 14 years later, look at him now. Joe Rogan started 36 years now. He's buying half of Austin, I'm assuming. And if I go back to my days of teaching in the corporate world, I used to teach sales classes, and there was a great guy named Zig Ziglar. There's a great example of somebody using stories to educate. Awesome guy. If you ever see a Zig Ziglar book or a CD or video, Zig's great. But he had a great line. He said, you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be great. And going back to Mr. Beast, he said, I just decided I was going to do 100 videos and make the next one better than the last one. And that's really all you have to do. You are really, forget about the audience and forget about all your, if you could put up some quotation marks for me, the competition. You're really battling your last episode and you're just trying to make it better. And then you do have to promote it in some way or another. And then maybe if you're not promoting it or you are promoting it, you're not getting much. Well, maybe you're fishing in the wrong pond. Maybe your people are over on LinkedIn and not so much on TikTok. You never know.
The School of Podcasting.
So start your podcast doing it for fun. Because if it's not fun, you're going to be one of those people that quits before they hit 7 episodes. And if it's not fun, instead of quitting, maybe change your format or the length or the schedule, or maybe just change your expectations. I always say when you start off, get a timer. I use toggl.com toggle. And I started off, I would record everything I did, all the planning, all the recording, all the editing, all the posting, everything. And then I looked at how much time it took. Last night I was working on a file on an episode for your podcast website. It took me 6 hours because I decided to do it in a narrative style. And if you're a person that's like, I don't have time to do 6 hours for a single episode, then don't do narrative style. Maybe you just need to change the style. And while we do focus on that MP3 file, the result of your work, never underestimate the value of the journey that you are taking as you create your podcast, because that may be the biggest benefit. I'm here to tell you, it's always a joke, right? You have on one hand, you'll either have a great podcast or you'll have a story about that time when you tried to start a podcast. And that may be an amazing story. You never know. But I am Dave Jackson. I help podcasters. It's what I do. And I would love to see what we can do together. Go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/listener. That'll automatically put that coupon in there for you. You can sign up for a monthly or yearly subscription, and that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So nothing to worry about. Don't like it? Day 29. Just email me, Dave. This isn't what I thought it was. I'm out of here. And why do I do that? 30 days. That's a long time. Because I have one of the best communities on the internet. It's amazing people. I have step-by-step courses that'll walk you through. And I believe in me as a teacher because I've been doing it forever. And I can help you get over those humps. schoolofpodcasting.com/listener. That's going to do it for this episode. Until next week, take care. God bless. Class is dismissed.